We shall commence this module by discussing about EXIM. EXIM is the core financial institution of India for coordinating the working of other institutions which are engaged in financing exports and imports. The institution announces EXIM policy, which is a set of guidelines and instructions related to imports and exports of India. Trade policy is prepared by the central government, that is by Ministry of Commerce. In general, the EXIM policy aims at encouraging exports, enhancing export potential, facilitating imports and creating favorable balance of payment position. Government of India appointed the Import and Export Policy Committee headed by Mr. Mudaliar in 1962 to review India's trade policy. The recommendations were accepted and then the Commerce Minister Mr. V.P. Singh announced the first export-import policy on April 12, 1985. Initially, the policy was made on a 3-year basis with the main aim of facilitating production and strengthening the economic base of India. Currently, the policy is announced for the period of 5 years on March 31st of every year. It is reviewed after every 1 year and updated if some modifications and new schemes are required. This periodical review implies that the policy successfully incorporates the necessary changes as per domestic and international environment. On broader terms, the general objectives of the policy are: first, to accelerate the growth of exports; second, to provide access to imported essential raw materials and inputs required for augmenting production; third, to enhance the technological strength of Indian industries, thereby improving their competitiveness and generating employment; and fourth, finally, to provide consumers with good quality products and services at competitive prices, while at the same time creating a level playing field for the domestic producers. The discussions on EXIM policy can be best divided into two periods. First, the pre-reform period, that is the time period before 1991, and second, the post-reform period, which is the time period after 1991. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the need and framing of export-import policy, analyze the two phases of policy regimes, learn to demarcate the differences in the two policy regimes, understand the holistic picture of the EXIM policy by describing its constituents in detail. Now, we will discuss the pre-reform period, that is the time period before 1991. To analyze the trade policy of India during the pre-reform period can be divided into 4 phases. Phase 1, from 1952-53 to 1956-57. Phase 2, from 1956-57 to June 1966. Phase 3, 1966-67 to 1975-76, and Phase 4 from 1975-76 to 1990-91. In the first phase, liberalization measures were announced for both imports and exports. This led to a remarkable increase in imports, but exports failed to pace with imports. In the second phase, trade policy was reformulated to be in line with the planning policies. Imports were controlled and import substitution measures were incorporated. On the export side, robust export promotion drive was launched through diversification of exports. Still, government failed to achieve good results in exports. So, in order to control imports, and boost exports, India resorted to devaluation in 1966. This marked the beginning of the third phase of trade policy from June 1966. The policy started showing positive results after the fourth five-year plan, but this effect continued till 1975-76. During the fourth phase, Government of India adopted import liberalization again, but this time it was done to promote export. We now give a brief of both the approaches. Import substitution. Import substitution is substituting the imported goods with the locally produced goods in order to meet the internal demand. After independence, import substitution was a major element of trade policy. As a result, India adopted an inward-looking strategy for development. This constituted the primary objective of the policies till the mid-1970s, and it was based on the Import and Exports Control Act of 1947 and the Import Trade Control Order of 1955. Import substitution policy implied that incentives were given to the firms which produced an imported item that was not produced domestically earlier. Export promotion strategy. Export promotion strategy promotes only the industries those has potential for competing with the foreign products. In India, a variety of measures were undertaken to promote exports. A liberal import policy was announced for 59 priority industries, which included a number of export-oriented industries. A new import scheme was launched which enables the registered exporters to obtain raw materials and other components against export of specified items. In the 1970s, several export promotion measures were put in place in the form of export incentives and export services to generate higher exports on a sustained basis. In 1980s, export competitiveness received a large attention and policies were prepared after intense discussion. By then, it became clear that production for exports cannot be separated from production for the domestic market. Domestic industrialization is necessary to have an integrated trade policy. A major component of the first EXIM policy was the provision of access to essential raw materials and capital goods, which resulted in technological upgradation and reduced cost. The trade policy in 1980s continued to emphasize on licensing mechanism and high tariffs in order to isolate Indian economy from external competition. The major changes in policies in pre-reform period are as follows. First, Duty Drawback Scheme known as DDS, 1954. This scheme was introduced in 1954 with the objective to reimburse exporters the tariffs paid on the imported materials and the excise duties paid on the domestically produced inputs which enter into export production. In this process, the application form for the drawback was simplified. In 1980-81, Duty Drawback Committee was formed and the scheme was made more effective through introduction of quick payment. Under this, the sanctions were given within 24 hours and actual payment within 15 days. However, importance of duty drawback scheme was declined since 1981 due to initiation of advanced license system which allows exporters to import duty-free inputs. Next is the replenishment license of 1957. Government has launched the Import Entitlement Scheme known as IES in 1957, which aimed at helping the exporters in procuring imported raw materials required for export production. In 1965, exporters are allowed replenishment licenses on the basis of bank certificates showing the actual proceeds from exports. However, IES was withdrawn after the devaluation of Indian rupee in 1966 but was soon reintroduced in a revised form. The new name of the scheme was Import Replenishment Scheme known as IRS. An IRS license permits the exporters to procure items that are restrictive in the import policy subject to the limits specified. Next is the Policy for Export or Trading Houses of 1960. According to this policy, exporters who fulfill the minimum export requirements in a specified period are granted the status of export houses, trading houses or star trading houses. Though this concept was evolved in 1950, but the criteria for this recognition of export houses has been changing since 1960. In 1968, the companies and cooperative societies having minimum annual export performance of rupees 24 lakhs in case of non-traditional products and rupees 2 crores in case of traditional were recognized as export houses. In 1975, criteria for recognition was that the companies have to show export performance of rupees 50 lakhs in case of select list of export products and rupees 2 crores in case of other products. In 1981-82, trading houses, which are different from the export houses, was one which was in the export field for the last 3 years with average annual exports of the products of at least rupees 10 crore. The 1988-90 policy fixed the limit for recognition as export houses and trading houses at rupees 2 crores and rupees 10 crores of net foreign exchange earning respectively. This was raised to rupees 5 crores for export houses and rupees 20 crores for trading houses by 1990-92. All these policies gave a special position to these export or trading houses and provided them with a number of import benefits. The benefits include the increase in the grant of renewals, licenses being made fully transferable and allowing import of raw materials which have limited permits or are listed under canalized items. Next is the free trade zones. In order to make Indian products competitive in the global market and give momentum to the exports, government set up free trade zones known as FTZs. In free trade zones, goods can be imported, manufactured and exported without the intervention of custom authorities. The first FTZ was set up in Kandla in 1965 and other FTZs were Santa Cura, Falta, Noida, Cochin and Madras. Santa Cura is mainly for electronic goods, but other FTZs are multi-product in character. Next is devaluation of rupee in 1966. By 1960s, it became quite necessary to conserve scarce foreign exchange reserves and to have sustained increase in export earnings as India was facing severe balance of payment crisis at that time. Thus, in order to restore the competitive potential of exports and as a solution to the balance of payment problem, the value of Indian rupee was reduced by 36.5% on June 6, 1966. This led to the rise of 57.5% in the price of foreign exchange in terms of Indian rupees. Next is cash compensatory support known as CCS of 1966. It was designed to give compensation for unrebated indirect taxes paid by exporters on inputs and market development cost. The scope of CCS was gradually extended over the years. The proportion of total exports eligible for CCS rose from 20% in 1970 to 40% in 1980. Multiplicity of rates was reduced from 17 to 7 under the new provisions of CCS in 1986. By 1991, 283 items were given grants under CCS. However, after trade liberalization, it was felt that CCS had become expendable and was abolished in July 1991. Next, we shall discuss the post-reform period, that is after 1991. A liberalized trade regime was started in 1990. This marked a remarkable turnaround from the earlier controlled environment. The new trade policy was in line with the wider economic reforms that were initiated in 1991. It was realized that all the policies should be a part of the integrated policy framework. This will improve the efficiency and productivity of the whole economic system. Thus, the trade policy enclosed many changes in the export incentive. Before 1991, the foreign trade of India suffered mainly because of the strict controls, also known as License Raj regime. Government took a major step in August 1991 and moved toward reducing controls and simplifying the procedures. It was done to create a conducive environment for trade. The focus of the policies shifted from regulations to promote and development of foreign trade. The objective was to improve the competitiveness and attain a higher growth profile. The period after 1991 is marked by the elimination of most quotas and sharp tariff cuts. The tariffs were as high as 350%, which were lowered in phases and reduced to 20% by the end of the century. This resulted in opening up of Indian economy. Duties on capital goods were also reduced to a large extent. All this led to the acceleration in trade and a far more open environment. Now, we list some of the changes to demonstrate the remarkable shift in policies. First, post-shipment export credit. EXIM Bank introduced new scheme post-shipment export credit, which was denominated in foreign currency to enable the exporters to get credit. It provided credit to Indian exporters at internationally competitive rate of interest. The interest rates were reduced from 11% to 9%. Later on, the scheme was reformulated to promote the exports, and also a major simplification of procedures was done. In 2004 to 2009 policy, the concessional rate of interest on post-shipment that was available up to 90 days was extended for a maximum period up to 365 days. Next, export promotion capital goods. In this scheme, government provided a reduced import duty of 15% for the import of certain capital goods subject to certain export obligation. Import of second-hand capital goods under the EPCG scheme was disallowed to provide level playing field to the domestic capital goods industries. In 1994-95, the scheme was extended to service sector. In 1997, duty on capital good was reduced to 10%. The EPCG scheme allows the import of capital goods at 0% duty for exports of agriculture and their allied products. The threshold limit for agriculture is also reduced from 20 crore rupees to rupees 5 crores. In 2000-2001, import of second-hand capital good have been permitted. In 2004, additional flexibility was introduced for the fulfillment of export obligation. This was done to reduce the difficulties of exporters of goods and services. Next is duty drawback facility. Government of India decided to continue the duty drawback facility in 1992-97 for exporters who had imported certain inputs under the duty exemption scheme, which was described in the earlier EXIM policy. New rates were announced with effect from 1st June of 1999. The new rates incorporated the changes in custom duties as well as inclusion of surcharge. The rates were again revised in 2001. Duty drawback rates were rationalized in line with the changes in custom duties announced in the Union Budget 2001 and 2. All industry rates were reduced in respect of 726 items, left unchanged for 26 items and increased for 14 items with 30 obsolete entries deleted. The changes also included introduction of new products. Next is decanalization. Earlier in India, a large number of exports and imports were used to be canalized through the public sector agencies. Government of India announced a trade policy on August 13, 1991 and decanalized 16 export items and 20 import items. The decanalized items included newsprint, non-ferrous metals and natural rubber. Importantly, only 8 items included petroleum products, fertilizers and edible oils were to remain canalized. Recently, in 2004 and 9, policy import of petroleum and petro goods were also decanalized. Next is Export-Import Passbook Scheme of 1995. An alternative route of the passbook scheme for some categories of exporters was opened up on March 31, 1995. Credit on customs duty was given for exports. In 1997, passbook scheme was replaced by a new scheme, Duty Entitlement Passbook, known as DEPB scheme. This scheme extended the coverage and also aimed for more of transparency. In 1999-2000, the credit entitlement increased from 5 to 10% of the previous year's performance. The scheme has been continued in 2004 and 9 policy and has removed any kind of uncertainty for the exporters. Next is convertibility of rupee on current account and capital account. In 1991, Government of India devalued the rupee by about 18% against 5 currencies. The Finance Minister announced the liberalized exchange rate mechanism system known as LERMS in the budget for 1992-93. It was a dual exchange rate under which 40% of the foreign earnings were to be given at the official exchange rate and the rest 60% were to be exchanged at a market determined rate. The foreign exchange exchanged at official rate was used to import of essential items like crude oil, petroleum product, fertilizers, etc. and the foreign exchange converted at the market rate was used to fund all other types of imports. Thus, LERMS commenced partial convertibility of the rupee on trade account. Further, 1993-94 budget introduced fully convertibility of the rupee. This allowed foreign exchange earners to convert 100% of their earnings at the market rate. Full convertibility on the current account was announced in the Union Budget of 1993-94. The objective of exchange rate system has been to ensure that the exchange value of the rupee is realistic and can sustain a proper current account balance. Now, we will discuss the evaluation of EXIM policy. The import control era had certain adverse effects like delays, administrative expenses and inflexibility. There was complete lack of competition and greater emphasis on capacity creation even if it was not utilized to the full potential. Further, there was loss of revenue because of discrimination against exports. The policy of import substitution diversification was successful in achieving the diversification, but it had its own limits in generating employment and accelerating growth. On the exports front, the potential to earn foreign exchange was severely limited, but the exports of manufactured products also suffered on account of serious external and internal problems. The external problems include the high tariffs placed by the developed countries on the exports from developing countries. On the domestic front, however, the problem is related to technological backwardness in India. Developed countries are far more advanced and efficient in technological terms. Let us now summarize what we have discussed in this module. First, trade policy of the country certainly aimed at resolving the key issues faced by the local exporters and achieving the sustainable export growth. Second, Government of India introduced various schemes to increase competitiveness of exports during the pre-reform and post-reform period. Third, schemes like devaluation of Indian rupee, import substitution, replenishment license, duty drawback scheme during pre-reform period and export promotion capital goods scheme, freer imports and exports, export-import passbook scheme, convertibility of rupee in current account and capital account, special financial packages during post-reform period proved to be very beneficial to increase the competitiveness of exports. Fourth, as a result, India's share in world exports increased from 0.40% in 1980 to 0.52 in 1990 and further to 1.5% in 2007.